The Diary of Dr. X, Episode 2. Why I am not an environmentalist. No, I would not describe myself as an environmentalist. I can't stand the word. But that doesn't mean I'm some heartless conservative bastard who sees nothing but dollar signs at the bottom line either. Hell, I've even hugged a tree on more than one occasion. Really? You see, there are two types of people when it comes to dealing with the ecological crisis which humanity is facing. And it is a crisis, believe me. On the one hand, there are those who think the problems can be solved without any significant change to the social, political, and philosophical status quo of modern society. They treat the ecological crisis as largely a technical problem that can be fixed with better science and technology, or perhaps a few minor reforms to legislation. They call for no fundamental changes in the capitalist economic and political system, and unfortunately, they are in charge. On the other hand, there are people like me who argue, based on the best scientific evidence available, that the economic ethic of the capitalist system itself is the root cause of the ecological crisis. More specifically, its obsession with economic growth as the sacred indicator of a healthy economy in the dominant religion of our age is the precise opposite of sustainability. The implication is that the only path available which could realistically allow humanity to avoid ecological meltdown involves deep and fundamental changes to capitalist society at all levels: social, political, economic, and philosophical. So what is the difference between environment and ecology, you ask? Because they do have precise definitions. Quite simply, it is the difference between what the corporate media wants the public to know and what the science of ecology teaches us. It is the difference between the superficial issues that corporations sell you between their all-pervasive propaganda, also known as advertisements, and the truth. And they don't want you to know the truth. Sorry to say. The reason is quite simple. Because the implications of ecological economics and other policies called for by the real green movement, not the one you hear about, is a threat to the bottom line of these massive, centrally planned transnational conglomerates. The same ones who own the media, coincidentally. The same ones who manufacture your consent to the realities they portray by spin-doctoring the news in a manner consistent with their own bottom line. Little nod to gnome there. Consequently, it is quite understandable if the average person is a bit confused. After all, if you don't go out of your way to do a little research on your own, say at the local university library or on a radical ecology website, you're unlikely to be aware of these differences. At the heart of the green movement, as a movement for social change, are the teachings of the science of ecology. The green movement is not about environmentalism. Ecology defines itself as a holistic study of the relationships among populations of living organisms and between living organisms and the inorganic environment. Physics and chemistry, soil, mountains, oceans, rivers. Holism here is a synonym for relationalism. In other words, the focus of study for ecologists and anthropologists like myself is upon studying the relationships between things, not on individual things themselves. Now let's contrast this relational approach and the definitions of holism and ecology with the term the media, government, and much of the rest of academia used to describe what are better understood as ecological issues, the environment. From an ecological perspective, the environment has a precise meaning and definition. In fact, it's used in the same manner as in the definition of ecology that I just gave to you above. Environment refers to the inorganic or non-living surroundings in which an organism lives, which may, of course, affect its development and behavior, as water and air do to us, and soil. In other words, environment is merely a synonym for context or surroundings. We can speak of a lunar environment, for example, on the moon. But we cannot speak of a lunar ecology. Why? Because there is no life there. Please note what is left out of the corporate media's choice of terminology as compared to ecologies. First of all, environment makes no reference to the centrality of living or organic systems to the subject matter, or how they are distinct from non-living or inorganic systems. Yet this is one of the central characteristics of the science of ecology. In fact, much of the ecological literature argues that one of the central problems with modern Western science, which guides our development of technology, and which has historically made it so destructive, is that it is inherently mechanistic. What does that mean? It means that from its beginnings, modern science pictured the world as though it were a giant machine, hence mechanistic. Basically, it was a machine that God gave a kickstart back in the beginning, being the creator. Nature was also pictured as dead, like any machine is, devoid of life. And of course, dead things can't be harmed. They exist merely to be used and exploited. So who gives a shit about their welfare, right? That's the implication in practice. Ecology proposes that the extent of our current ecological crisis requires the development of a new paradigm, a non-mechanistic model of reality. That's what a paradigm means, a model of reality, how we think about the world around us. They propose an organic worldview to replace the mechanistic views of modern science. In short, a science for understanding what are described as complex organic systems. That is, living systems, such as ecosystems, the biosphere, and even human culture, which is what I primarily study as an anthropologist. And not just in isolation either, but as they're all related to one another to form a larger system. It's the corporate media which misrepresents environmental problems as isolated problems which can be fixed through better legislation and better modern science and technology. The Grieve movement argues that modern science and its understandings of nature as a mechanical realm is part of the problem. Similarly, it's the corporate media that represents global warming as a distinct problem from acid rain and nutrient pollution and ozone depletion, which we may talk about in future episodes. Ecology looks at the potential interactions between all of these negative ecological processes and more, all of which are caused by our technology, our way of thinking and acting in the world. In fact, Chris Bright from WorldWatch published an article in 1999 in the WorldWatch Institute's magazine, and he once described the potential for feedbacks between these many interlocking ecological problems as the nemesis effect. The ominous-sounding name is not accidental. Bright argues that there is potential for a global-scale collapse of the biosphere itself due to the interlocking nature of these and other ecological problems. It is also not the green movement that isolates ecological issues from social problems, like poverty, which I have experienced firsthand, as you know, unemployment, population, consumption, and the ecological impacts of consumption, like pollution. That is again the corporate media is doing. In fact, ecology argues that the relationships between each and every one of these problems must be understood if we are to create an ecologically sustainable society. That's our goal. Let us not forget that E.F. Schumacher, the founder of green economics and one of my heroes, I must admit, specifically designed his idea of ecologically appropriate technology as a means of alleviating poverty in the third world. He also argued that we should move in the direction of decentralized production facilities ourselves as well, and towards a shift to local production from local resources to meet the local needs of local people on a global basis. This is because such a pattern makes much more efficient use of energy and materials than centralized planning does. Such a pattern would also imply a decentralized pattern of ownership. Starting to understand why the corporate media is reluctant to promote ecological ideas now? So the real reason the corporate media doesn't want you to know what ecology and the green movement really stand for is because green politics, I'm here to inform you, is essentially a defense of not only life itself, which I think we can all agree is somewhat important, but of democracy. It is an attempt to restore a more democratic pattern of political and economic organization than what we currently have. What ecology argues is that very deep and fundamental changes are necessary at all levels in Western society, from ideology, including science and growth-oriented economics, to political and economic organization, which needs to be decentralized, to technology, levels of population and consumption, which need to be, well, sustainable and need to minimize ecological impacts, negative ones, of course. And this type of decentralized world, such a free, democratic, sustainable society calls for, is the polar opposite of the future that the centralized planners are attempting to sell you in their media. As far as they are concerned, the future is friendly. Cheers.